This is Love Notes, daily devotions from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. Grace and peace to you. God's love is something that we need to be reminded of every single day. There are too many voices that come from within and without that tell us we are unworthy, that tell us we have to compete, that tell us that we have to get ahead of others, strive harder to be number one, or however it comes. Because the last thing we want in the world is to be left out, to be losers. So how is it that God has decided to tell us that all of the other core beliefs we've talked about thus far are true? Well, we believe this. God's love is poured out when God's people gather around word, water, wine, and bread. God could use, heavenly pyrotechnics, like the pillar of cloud and fire in Exodus. God could use voices in the night. God could use any means in order to communicate clearly to us that we are loved. And we might or might not believe any of them. In Jesus Christ, who has created the church, God has decided to come clearly to us as Christ in the simplest of things. In the Word, as it is read, preached, prayed, and sung. In water, poured out in baptism, which announces to the baptized, "You are my child, with you I am well pleased." And in wine and bread, each and every time we worship, that said, "This is my body and this is my blood given for you." That's how God has chosen to tell us over and over and over that His love is real and for us. There's a scene in the Gospel according to Luke after Jesus has been crucified, and it's been reported that the tomb is empty and that He's been raised from the dead, but not everybody is believing this yet. There are two disciples who go ahead home to a town called Emmaus. On the way, they're talking about how sad it is that the person they pinned their hopes on, Jesus, was now dead. And suddenly a stranger appears with them, walks with them. They ask him if he's heard about what's happened. He says no. They're surprised. They tell him that Jesus was a prophet, that He was mighty indeed, and that He was put to death. And that even now people are saying He's been raised from the dead. Jesus then rebukes them a little bit. He says, well, isn't that what the scriptures say? Isn't that what this Jesus told you? And it says, then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, He interpreted to them the things about Himself in all of the scriptures. God's love is poured out when God's people gather around the Word. Why is it important to read the Bible? To have a Bible that is the undergirding and foundation of our life together? Because that's where the words are. That's where the story is. That's where the truth is told. Even though it's sometimes inscrutable and confusing, that's the cradle from which the Christ child rises, as Luther taught. So they come near to the village. He was going to walk ahead of them, but they were home, so they urged him, "Stay with us. It's almost evening, the day is now over, so come in, have a meal with us." So he went in to stay with them. And when he was at the table, he took the role of the host. Now, that's kind of odd. It's their house, but he takes the bread and he blesses it and he breaks it. Have you ever heard those instructions before? He blessed it and he broke it, and then he gave it to them. It happens every week around the wine and the bread. And in that moment, all the connections came together and their eyes were opened and they knew that it was Jesus. They knew that he was there with them in the wine and the bread and the word that was spoken. And then he vanished from their sight. And they looked at one another and they said, were not our hearts burning with us while we were on the road with him? While he was opening the scriptures to us? And so what did they do? Instead of staying there in the dark, to the place of refuge they'd gone to escape the depressing news of the cross, they ran back to Jerusalem and witnessed to everyone that the Lord had risen and appeared to them. And they heard that he'd done it with all kinds of other people as well. You see, when we hear the word, when we baptize with water, when we gather around the table, Christ is with us. How do we know that? Because he promised. And God doesn't break promises. So at the core of our worship, our praise, and the reminder that we get each and every week, we are told about God's love. God's love is poured out when God's people gather around word, water, wine, and bread. Amen.